Hey there guys, I am the Six Machine and welcome back to another Warhammer video. We have finally reached the last of the Dark Angels characters, I think. Can't think of any that I've missed, and so today we are going to be looking at arguably one of the best characters the Dark Angels have access to thanks to the strength of the Interromancy Discipline, and that is their chief librarian, Ezekiel. We won't go into the actual Interromancy powers themselves, as I have done another video on those specifically, which I will link below, but like the other review videos, we will be talking about his stats, his weapons, his abilities, and any other special rules to go through exactly why he is such a great pick for your Dark Angels list. So straight off the bat, you can take him in your list for just 125 points. Which is honestly incredibly good value, and as a bit of reference means that he is just 5 points more than a regular Primaris Librarian, which has been upgraded to a Chief Librarian. So as we look through his abilities, it's worth remembering that all of it comes at the cost of just 5 points more than taking the Chief Librarian option instead. He has a very good profile, sitting somewhere between a regular librarian and something like a captain, with an above usual for a librarian, weapon and ballistic skill of 2+, strength and toughness of 4, 5 wounds, which actually puts him at the same wounds characteristic as the previously mentioned Primaris librarian, only 3 attacks, which is a bit of a shame, leadership 9, and a very tasty 2-up save. It's very much a solid HQ level character stat line, and although an extra attack would be nice, if you do compare it to something like the Primaris Librarian, he gains that extra weapon and ballistic skill and a 2-up save at the cost of the extra attack that the Primaris version has, which, in my opinion, is a very good trade-off, and already arguably worth that extra 5 points before we even get onto things like his special rules. Because yes, he won't be the killiest character on the table with only 3 attacks, but he hits more often and he is a good bit more survivable, having that bump from a 3-up to a 2-up save. He is of course a Psyker and can attempt to manifest and deny 2 powers in your or your opponent's psychic phase respectively, and in addition to Smite, he knows a massive 3 powers from the Interromancy Discipline, and when you consider the fact that 5 out of the 6 powers in Interromancy are absolutely incredible, he really can pick and choose some unbelievably strong combos, buffs, and other useful powers to use across the course of the game. Naturally, being a Dark Angel and a Space Marine, he has the usual special rules that come alongside that, Grim Resolve giving him that +1 to hit when he hasn't moved, which, as always, is a little bit meh on a character with a 2-up to hit anyway, but as per his keywords, he does have the Deathwing keyword, so for Sons of the Lion, the implacable part of that rule does come into effect. And as I said, he isn't the most killy character in the codex by any stretch, but he does have a semi-decent sword, and so being able to reroll wounds against characters or models with 8 or more wounds can help him to actually do some damage if he does end up having to face off against an enemy character in melee. Angels of Death, once again, is up on the screen for you to see, and as always, the only ones that we really care about are combat doctrines, giving him that extra -1 AP for his melee weapon and the pistol that he has, as well as unlocking that very useful Sons of the Lion ability for him. Funnily enough, as we will see in just a moment, Shock Assault actually does nothing for Ezekiel, as he has a rule which specifically doesn't work alongside it. And then we have And They Shall Know No Fear and Bolter Discipline, which are both irrelevant, him being a single model unit and also not having a rapid fire weapon, meaning they will never ever come into effect. But now onto the fun stuff in the form of his own unique special rules, and he does have a few that really do make him an incredibly good pick to bring along in your games. First off, on the survivability front, he does indeed have Inner Circle, once again making your precious Dark Angel characters and HQs just unbelievably tanky and survivable against all manner of enemy attacks, and giving them a huge advantage if they do ever get caught up in combat against those scary enemy melee characters like Dante or Demon Princes, or even things like Knights, they just cannot wound you on less than a 4+. And so essentially anything over strength 4 is effectively wasted against Ezekiel, and means that he really can punch above his weight in terms of surviving an enemy onslaught. And as I said, even if he isn't the best at killing enemies back, when it gets to the Assault Doctrine and Implacable kicks in, it really does mean that he can stand his ground and then put in a pretty solid effort into killing enemy characters that are swinging into him. Ezekiel also comes with a set of keys. Yep, I'm dead serious, he's got a set of keys. And they give him the appropriately named Keeper of the Keys special rule, which, unlike most other librarians, grants him a 4+ invulnerable save. And now, although most characters do have invuns, librarians as a rule generally don't come with one. Normal librarians don't have one, and even named ones from other chapters like Tigurius or Mephiston don't get the honor of having one. So this really is quite a big deal in terms of adding that extra survivability to Ezekiel, and like we've seen on other Dark Angel HQs, alongside Inner Circle basically means that even after an enemy has hit you, they're still going to need a 4+ to wound and then get past a 4+ invuln to actually get that damage through. So it really is a big boost to how long Ezekiel can stick around on the table. In terms of his prowess as a psyker, again, Ezekiel puts on a very strong showing, and whilst I don't think he's quite at the level of Tigurius in this respect, the fact that he comes along with such a powerful discipline does make him definitely comparable in his overall usefulness to your games. He of course comes with a Psychic Hood, which allows you to add +1 to deny the witch tests if you're within 12 inches of the model casting the power. And this is an easy to forget ability, at least I always find it is, but that extra +1 can be incredibly helpful, especially considering that you need to beat the enemy's casting attempt, not to just equal it. And with a lot of powers being a 6 or a 7 to cast, having that additional little bump to get you over the average of 7 on 2d6 does give you a little bit of a stronger chance of stopping that power going off. And yes, you do need to be relatively close, but Ezekiel will almost certainly be moving up alongside some stronger melee units like Terminators or Blade Guard veterans, so it is quite likely that he will be within 12 inches of an enemy psyker sooner or later and can take full advantage of that Psychic Hood. He also has the Master Interromancer rule, which is specific to him and lets you add +1 to the test when you try to manifest a power from Interromancy. Now this is absolutely huge. Not only does he know 3 powers from the discipline, but the fact that they are all so incredibly good and generally have a casting value of 6 or 7 means that you should, assuming average rolling, always have a very good chance of getting those powers off with that +1. You should be rolling 7s or 8s according to the math gods, and whilst obviously this won't always happen, you can be pretty confident that when you need to get a power off, Ezekiel has a better than average chance of doing it every single time. And honestly, with how clutch a lot of the Interromancy Discipline powers are, that extra little bit of reliability gives him a huge advantage over just a regular Dark Angels librarian. In terms of not just his survivability but actually causing damage, as we've mentioned, with only 3 attacks he isn't the most terrifying melee character, and as I said before, Shock Assault doesn't actually do anything for him, but that isn't because he doesn't get that extra attack on the charge. No. Instead, he just gets an extra attack all the time, and not just when it activates through Shock Assault. With his Book of Salvation ability, he grants all friendly Dark Angels core and character units within 6 inches an extra attack. Now do note this does specify, as I said, that this doesn't stack with the Shock Assault ability, but what it means that even after you've charged or been charged and end up getting stuck in a long, protracted, ongoing combat, say if your Deathwing Knights are up against some Blightlord Terminators and it's gonna take a few rounds for one side to whittle down the other, you don't lose that extra attack on your guys in the subsequent rounds. They still get to essentially act as though they've charged and Shock Assault is in effect. It really is an incredibly strong ability to have in those longer combats that go on for several rounds. And also, as an aside, as this isn't an ability that activates on the charge, it means that if your enemy has some kind of power that negates the bonuses of charging, so you wouldn't get that extra attack from Shock Assault, you will still get it from this. So yes, whilst it may not actually come into play unless you're in a long combat or your enemy has certain abilities, it really does pay for itself hugely as soon as you enter that second round of combat. And the fact that it's an aura for all core and characters means that if Ezekiel is in some kind of Death Star with Deathwing Knights and maybe another character or two, he will be granting that extra attack to all of the models around him and really helping them to just cut down anything that stands in their way. And I think that, again, as far as rules go, if nothing else, this alone is worth that extra 5-point bump over a regular Primaris Chief Librarian, and even that isn't all that Ezekiel has to offer over the non-named version. In terms of his own personal damage output, his war gear is, whilst not absolutely terrifying, actually not at all bad for the points you pay for him. Instead of a bolt pistol, Ezekiel has his own custom version named the Deliverer, and this is basically the same as a normal bolt pistol, except it has a rather nice -1 AP and a surprisingly impressive 2 damage profile, which means that he can realistically kill an extra marine if he is engaged in combat with a squad, and when you get to the right doctrine, pushing that to -2 AP really will allow him to have a semi-decent chance of getting a wound through. It's quite handy, seeing as most of the time, if you have just a normal bolt pistol, you, or at least I, often forget that it's there, as it's just so unlikely to ever do anything. But with this, it's well worth remembering to actually fire it into combat, as it does add some semi-decent output to his damage potential. His other weapon is his sword, which is named Traitor's Bane, and can we just take a moment here to talk about the fact that the Dark Angels have the absolute coolest character and weapon names? Azrael, Ezekiel, and then the Sword of Secrets, Traitor's Bane, the Heavenfall Blades. It's just such a cool chapter in terms of its lore and naming conventions and everything. It really is one of the reasons that I love the Dark Angels so much, and Ezekiel just, in my mind, brings all of that cool, rich backstory and lore together in a model which is also incredibly good on the tabletop and still looks absolutely brilliant, even though his model is over 20 years old. Anyway, back on topic. Traitor's Bane is similar to other Dark Angel swords in that it is +2 strength, -3 AP, and does D3 damage. It's not shabby at all, although I would personally prefer just a flat 2 damage, to be honest. But its unique twist, like all the Heavenfall style blades have, is that against Fallen or Heretic Astartes, it goes to a flat 3 damage. And if we're being honest, this is probably the worst out of all of the swords given to the Dark Angel HQs, purely because it is such a niche effect. If you go up against a lot of chaos, then sure, it will be really handy to have, but in general, you will rarely get to enjoy that flat 3 damage and will usually just have to settle for the D3 profile. As I said, it's still not bad by any means, and with Ezekiel having Implacable, he can take advantage of that strength 6 to get a decent number of his hits turned into wounds and potentially do up to 12 damage in a single phase, thanks to the extra attack from the Book of Salvation, but it's just not anything as amazing as, say, Belial's sword or Azrael's sword, in my opinion. What can make Ezekiel really hilarious in combat, though, is the Warlord trait he has if he's your Warlord. He has to take the Stubborn Tenacity trait, which, I will be honest, I think is very much a sleeper hit in the Codex, and a lot of people don't quite realize just how good it actually is. Stubborn Tenacity gives Ezekiel the ability to effectively not die. It's not like the Ancient's Banner that lets you fight before you remove the model. If Ezekiel dies and he's your Warlord, he just flat out doesn't get removed from the board until the start of the next turn or the end of the battle, whichever comes first. So if he and a squad of Deathwing Terminators are in that previously mentioned ongoing combat and your opponent activates and kills Ezekiel before any of your units swings, not only does Ezekiel get to stay and do his attacks back, but he's still counted as being in play, so his Book of Salvation ability is still kicking in, giving all of your other models that +1 attack for their swings as well. And if you say charge Ezekiel into an enemy and they kill him in Overwatch, that's great, he's dead, but he still gets to stick around until the start of the next turn, so he can complete his charge and swing into the enemy before he's eventually removed. It really is a much better ability than the other ones that just let you swing before you die, for example, and honestly it really is a very nasty surprise when your opponent thinks that they've killed him and he just keeps hanging around for the rest of the turn. It does mean that he will always get to make his attacks in melee no matter what, and with 4 attacks at strength 6, rerolling wounds if you're up against an enemy character and in the Assault Doctrine, and doing D3 damage, you may well be able to get your last bit of vengeance with Ezekiel before he's removed from play. In terms of Stratagem Support, funnily enough, there actually isn't much that really interacts with Ezekiel. If he isn't your Warlord, then Only in Death Does Duty End could be one to consider to let him swing with Traitor's Bane before he dies. But again, as we've said, at the end of the day, Ezekiel isn't the most killy character in the Codex, so if you have another character that can do more damage, it may well be worth saving those command points in case they die. But I suppose if he got killed by a Demon Prince or Abaddon or something like that, you could let Ezekiel swing back before he's removed and get his sword up to that flat 3 damage. May be worth spending 2 CP on that, especially if the enemy is down to their last couple of wounds, for instance. Tactical Appraisal is another that could be really useful if there is a charge on turn 1 or 2. Ezekiel really does want to be in the Assault Doctrine to get the most benefit from his attacks, so being able to just put yourself into the Assault Doctrine to access his Sons of the Lions ability may not be the worst way to spend a command point. But equally, in turns 1 and 2, I would fully expect Ezekiel to still be snuggled in quite nicely with a big squad of Terminators, and in my opinion, Tactical Appraisal would probably be better spent putting them into the Assault Doctrine instead. In terms of how I personally would use him, I think, as we've mentioned, rolling him up the board with a squad of Deathwing Knights or Terminators to help boost them with his extra attack for ongoing combats, as well as his powers like Righteous Repugnance for those full rerolls to hit and to wound, can really turn a Deathwing Knight squad from terrifying into just absolutely obscene in the amount of damage they can do. He is very much a buffing support style character who helps to make the surrounding squads better overall, so I wouldn't send him off running after enemy characters and that sort of thing, as I just don't think he will do quite as well as you hope, especially compared to characters like Belial, for example. But being part of a bigger mixture of units and bringing his incredibly strong psychic powers to bear can really buff both the output and the durability of his allies around him. And I know I said I wouldn't go into detail about Interromancy specifically, but I think in terms of his best powers, obviously Righteous Repugnance and Mindworm are almost must-takes in any situation, so those are very good on him. But especially for Ezekiel with a big squad of Terminators, for his third power I would probably usually take Aversion in a take-all-comers situation. The extra -1 to hit can massively hinder a squad that's trying to kill the big blob of Terminators that you have, and seeing as Ezekiel will likely be up close and personal with the Terminator squad anyway, he probably will quite often get to do the second part of the Aversion power, which reduces the attack's characteristic of the target unit, making them much less scary in melee combat as well. But there we go, that is all for Ezekiel. In my opinion, he is honestly one of the most useful all-round characters in the entire codex, bringing a great mixture of buffing abilities, survivability, decent melee output, all the while having access to what is quite possibly one of the strongest psychic disciplines in the entire game at this point, and having some genuinely brilliant targets to cast his powers on as well. For 125 points, I seriously do think he is a bit of a steal, and if you wanted a librarian in your list at all, I would always recommend that you try to find those extra points to bring him along instead of a regular or a chief librarian. He just adds so much more utility and damage and consistency for those extra points. But what do you think of Ezekiel? Do you bring him over a regular librarian or a chief librarian, or do you not think he is worth that extra cost? And when you do take him, what powers do you generally tend to bring with him? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. I've really enjoyed doing this Dark Angels character series, and I will be doing more Dark Angels specific units, as well as looking at some of the other chapters like the Blood Angels and their characters in the future as well. But please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, and if there is any particular armies or units or anything like that you would like me to talk about and review, do let me know down in the comments and I will get to them as soon as I can. But thanks very much again for watching, and until next time, I will catch you later, guys.